What's happening, folks? Aruj here, and today we're talking about DNA versus RNA. The first part of this lecture, I'm going to cover the differences between the two molecules, and then at the very end of the lecture, I'm going to cover 3 different types of RNA molecules. So first, I want you to go ahead and make this chart so we could contrast the difference between these two. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA simply just stands for ribonucleic acid. Now, why do they have those differences in names? Well, that goes to the sugar. The sugar in DNA is deoxyribose, and the sugar in RNA is just ribose. Okay. DNA, as we know, DNA is a double-stranded molecule, and RNA is just a single strand. Okay. So DNA is double, RNA is single. And now if we look at the bases, or the nucleotides that we have in DNA, DNA has adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. However, RNA has one different. RNA has uracil instead of thymine. Okay? So, we'll actually cover that on the next slide. If we look at the sugar between deoxyribose and ribose, why do they have that difference in names? Well, it's pretty simple. If you look at the atoms that form deoxyribose, it's actually missing an oxygen, whereas ribose has an oxygen present at that same location. So what deoxyribose is referring to is that it's deoxygenated. It's missing one oxygen, whereas ribose has that oxygen. So that's the only difference between those two sugars. Deoxyribose is missing an oxygen, ribose has that extra oxygen. And that's really the only difference between the two sugars that we need to go over. If we look at the bases, or the nucleotides in RNA, I mentioned RNA doesn't have thymine. Instead, RNA has uracil. But it still works as if it were thymine. They're still complementary of each other. Uracil and adenine still fit. So if we're talking about 2 strands of DNA, if we're talking about 2 strands of DNA, and one strand has an adenine, we know the opposing strand must have thymine. Okay? Now, next week we'll go over when this actually happens, but from time to time we'll have DNA split, and RNA will actually be made from DNA. So we'll have DNA here, and we'll have RNA pairing with it, because remember, RNA is that single strand. Now, if DNA has an adenine on its strand, on the opposing strand of RNA, it will have a uracil instead. Okay? Everything else is identical though. If a DNA has cytosine, RNA will have guanine. If DNA has guanine, RNA will have cytosine, and vice versa. Okay? The only difference is, instead of thymine, we have uracil. So how are we going to remember this? Because remember I said apples and trees. Oops, put an extra S in there. Apples and trees, and cars in garages. Okay? Adenine and thymine, cytosine and guanine. We could still use a mnemonic for this. Instead, it's going to be apples with Mr. Udall. Okay? A pairs with U. Apples with Udall. Just use that to remember adenine and DNA is going to pair with uracil and RNA. Okay? Okay, let's go over the 3 types of RNA. The first one is going to be messenger RNA. And the great thing about these different types of RNA is their job, or their function, is right in their name. So RNA is actually going to be used to carry a message. And next week we'll go over what that message is and why that's important. Next we have transfer RNA, and that is actually this molecule right here. It looks really funky, and we'll go over this more next week, but let me give you a brief explanation of it. tRNA is it stands for transfer RNA, and it's transferring an amino acid. Okay, so it's carrying something. It's carrying this amino acid to where it needs to go, and it's still a single strand, even though it has this funky shape. If we follow it, tRNA is still just one strand. It's just that that strand is pairing with itself. Okay. And the last type of RNA, you're probably not going to hear of, much more in the class, but I'm just going to tell you what it is. It's rRNA, which stands for ribosomal RNA. What is ribosomal RNA? It's basically what ribosomes are made out of. So if we take a ribosome, which we're going to talk more about next week, a ribosome is basically proteins, a bunch of proteins with rRNA. And that's essentially all ribosomes are. Okay? So if we were to do a quick recap, we talked about the differences between DNA and RNA and their structure. The first difference is the sugar. The sugar in DNA is deoxyribose. The sugar in RNA is ribose. DNA is a double strand. RNA is just a single strand. And lastly, DNA has the bases adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, whereas RNA has adenine and uracil, guanine, and cytosine. Okay. We talked about differences in their function and three types of RNA molecules. We had mRNA, which stands for messenger RNA. It carries a message. Oops, go back real quick. We had tRNA, which stands for transfer RNA. It carries an amino acid, or it's transferring an amino acid. And then lastly, we had rRNA, which stands for ribosomal RNA, and it's what ribosomes are made out of. And that's it for today. Hope that was helpful.